Greetings, everyone. We are live. We are the Skeptic Feminists, and today we are joined by Varmint Coyote and Bobo Thursday. I am Ivy and Skeptic Feminists, Russian Deadpool. So let's get to chatting here.
Yes, indeed. So my understanding is that the topic on the table is that how we each treat MRAs and how we distinguish between trolls, anti-feminists, and things like that. Is that the general gist of the discussion then?
Yeah, I guess this is more or less a continuation on a disagreement we had on your page concerning how we define a movement. It more or less came down to a point of the actual substance of the disagreement between us. I'm not sure who I was talking to at the time. Was, do we judge a movement by the actions of the like most of its members, or do we judge a movement by what it says it is on paper? And I think obviously the real answer is some kind of combination of the two, because we have to operate in reality based on what we're really dealing with, but at the same time, when we're dealing with individuals, it depends on context, and we have to be fair to what they mean by the terms when they're operating under them. So, you know, it's a matter of delineating, I guess, between people who could be fairly called men's rights activists according to just the words and what they literally mean, versus the people who are stridently anti-feminist MRAs, people who don't actually fight for anything positive, but instead are entirely reactionary. And that's obviously a really important thing when it comes to us having discussions with people about whether or not they're disingenuous propaganda parrots or people who may have legitimate disagreements with us.
Okay, well, yeah, I would like to start by, on our end, kind of clarifying our position on the matter. So I'm going to ramble for a second. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah. I should say, I should note, that's one reason I wanted to bring Bobo in, because she's much more stridently against MRAs, so felt that might spice things up a little bit, so have at it.
Cool. All right. So, to put it simply, we're not anti-MRA. We are of the opinion that as humanists, we are not only women's rights activists, but also men's rights activists and children's rights activists, and hell, mammals' rights activists as well. Why not? Just because it feels like a humanist value, a secular ethics. There are legitimate issues that men do face, even in the first world, that do need addressing, and we wouldn't begrudge men advocates if that is their passion. Now, we identify as atheist activists and feminist advocates because we agree with Christopher Hitchens when he said that the cure for poverty has been known for a very long time. It is the empowerment of women. When you take women off the animal cycle of reproduction, give them some control over their bodies, maybe throw in a few seeds for crops, the floor of everything in that community will rise, be it education or economics, you name it. Try it in Bangladesh, try it in Boston, it works. So we feel that our time is best spent as advocates and activists for women's rights, and our focus primarily is as those rights are challenged by religious doctrine and how that doctrine extends into policies even in secular first world nations. Our problem is not with men's rights activists, only with anti-feminists. So we make that distinction. Those are those who feel that the only way they can address the issue the issues that are important to them is basically by shitting on another human rights group, in this case feminism. We take issue with them. This is where anti-feminists would start objecting. I kind of wish we had one or two here to make it less of a one-sided discussion. But this is where they would object that they can't do men's rights activism while feminism is a thing, to which we basically just have to say tough shit. If we felt that, like, white people, for example, were somehow disadvantaged in the West, we wouldn't try to dismantle the work of the civil rights movement that has pushed forward and continues to maintain those rights to this very day. We would work within the progress that has already been made. So While there's certainly elements within the larger feminist community that that need serious addressing, revision, like people blocking peaceful meetings or trying to censor public speakers. We're not okay with that. Or trans-exclusionary homophobia, which is prevalent in some small circles of feminism, or sex-negative or sex-exclusionary, sex worker exclusionary feminists. Slut shaming, basically. We do not reject the label of feminism merely because there are groups like that within feminism. We refuse to let others define it for us. The definition is there for all to see, and it is perfectly in line with basic humanist principles. The anti-humanists that come to our channel and try to tell us what feminism is, what we should believe, that we should be dogmatic, that, like Skeptic Feminist is an oxymoron, that's a favorite, that feminism is a religion, or even that we somehow victimize women by addressing these issues, or that we should hate all men or something. It's all completely fallacious, and we won't let those people or the radicals within feminism define what feminism is. So, unlike religion, which has very specific doctrines that are counter to human well-being, feminism, the definition of feminism is very much pro-human well-being. So we have no problem being defined as feminists by that definition and upholding those values. And anything, so in other words, since feminism has these very agreeable set of principles, we can be considered fundamentalist feminists because it's just the very basic fundamentals of feminism that we operate under, and we're also classical liberals and humanists and atheists and everything like that. So I understand that there is overlap between anti-feminists, to get back to the topic, between anti-feminists and men's rights activists and like men going their own way and red pillars and pickup artists and shit like that, but we would rather not assume that an MRA is also an anti-feminist until they tell us as much. So we prefer to give them enough leeway to express themselves, and then if they want to use that slack to hang themselves by being against another human rights group, so be it. That's my spiel.
Hey, see, I'm very much in line with everything that you just said. It's a matter of, are there really, like, I personally, for example, this is one of those things, like how often you actually run into a men's rights activist who actually deserves the title, and that's kind of the point, is the issue of how toxic the term has become in practice because it's so tethered to anti-feminism, where these are people that their entire point isn't one where, like, they have academia that they're operating from, where they're taking from various disciplines and putting their own ideology together or something. This is people who are reactionary and don't like these ideas, and they're ignorant of what they actually mean, and they kind of go from there. It's like there's not any merit to any discussion to be had with them type idea. And unfortunately, it seems that there's no real organized group of people who actually deserve to be called men's rights activists because of what they actually do. And that's the point, is that, I mean, it's like, again, coming back to what the original disagreement was, like being fair to individuals. There's something to be said for being fair to individuals, but when they're associating themselves with something that's that toxic, it's like, it's hard to respect the views that they have when they operate from something that, again, it doesn't have any basis in reality, and it's all reactionary. I like my privilege, and I want to maintain my privilege despite the fact that it's literally causing people to die. But it makes me feel more comfortable to just ignore these issues and deny that they exist and paralyze conversations every time they happen. And that's why I run into most often is just the sea lining, the asking questions for the sake of asking questions, the conspiratorial thinking, nothing that would be considered productive.
Yeah, and of course they would say, they would try to reverse this onto feminism, fallaciously so.
False equivalence that they always come back to.
Yes.
It was actually funny. We were having for the last like 2 days having like a Twitter argument with Allison Tiemann, who mans the Honey Badger's Twitter account, and she's made some amazing claims to the point where she's saying that these patriarchal, monotheistic, Abrahamic religions favor women and they're gynocentric, and just amazing, amazing claims that are so easily debunked. It's amazing that she would. I don't want to make the discussion about her, but it's an example of how of these conspiratorial claims that are backed by very tedious evidence. Like she cites a single pro-woman verse, you know, and it kind of like a Christian would, and then like, you see, it's pro-woman, so therefore it's bad to men or something, and just ignoring the plethora is the word, I think, right? Yes. Plethora of anti-woman, you know, garbage that's in there as far as owning women and sex slaves and everything else, and rape laws.
That's kind of what I'm talking about too. That's a good case study right there of how you're trying to have a discussion with someone that isn't operating in reality. That's why I like the analogy of anti-feminists to Christian apologists versus feminists to evolutionists type idea, or well, just evolutionary biologists, because it's like you're trying to have a discussion with someone who rejects reality, and I think that I like that comparison, because these are the people who very often like to compare feminism to a religion. Yeah. And it's like, no, we're the ones that are operating in the reality, and you're the ones who aren't. And so that's the false equivalence that they use, where it's unfortunate that you're dealing with internet-educated people who don't understand scientific rigor and just how much they don't know, and believe they can debate with you by searching out an article that agrees with them. They don't have to consult anybody or have any learning or larger understanding of what they're talking about in order to argue about it.
It's ironic that they accuse us of living in an echo chamber when
I'm the person who purposely, when I started talking about gender stuff, it's like, all right, let's go to the people that I know personally who are psychologists who focus on gender issues and discuss this with them, because I'm curious to actually know the facts. And, you know, I would want to know, for example, if, I don't know, maybe, you know, Tumblr feminists and all this whatever is like, you know, making up some science for me to believe in about biology and how we differentiate sex from gender and parse out the concept of gender and stuff. And it's just, no, this is what the experts in the relevant fields think.
Well, this is where more of the conspiracy stuff comes in terms of, you know, how they always distinguish third-wave feminists dominate the academies, so you only get one side of the story. Teach the controversy is basically
the liberals are running the university, so they're going to rob you of your theism. And
reality has a liberal bias, right?
Which is funny to say. It's exactly what you have the hardcore Christian people claiming about academia. Oh, you only get the evolution side of the story because it's all dominated by atheists who won't ever tell you about the things that support our side. It's the exact same argument.
It's arrogance when we understand reality and they're ignoramuses.
And like I said, it is important for us to not close ranks when a feminist is wrong. When they're wrong factually or ethically, and so it's important for us to call them out so that we don't play into that trope of feminism being a monolith. But at the same time, they inflate this trope of feminists being this like Borg hive Zerg single mind. We need to police our own, you know. I think perhaps more diligently than we're doing now. We can't hesitate to be self-critical, to be skeptical of each other, and it's to the benefit of the movement to be self-critical. The moment that a movement becomes uniform is the moment that it dies intellectually, I think. So yeah.
No, this is part of the, I think I mentioned, this is part of that doublethink that you find very often, though, where we are accused of being hegemonic in our thinking on things, to not disagreeing with each other, despite the fact that we regularly, as feminists, we purposely question each other and build our ideas by disagreeing with each other. I'm emboldened by the pushback I've seen against white feminism here recently, especially, where we're trying to work out a lot of the racist elements of that kind of got into the beginning of the third wave of feminism. And I like how intersectionality is really trying to address that, because we try to moderate extremists out of our movement. And again, this is a dissonance you'll find with the men's rights movement, with anti-feminists in general, is that they'll throw their lot in with more or less anybody. Because again, regardless of who they're dealing with, like you found this with Gamergaters especially, how they started from such racist roots on 4chan's politically incorrect forum, and it's, you know, neo-Nazis and that kind of basis, and it's a matter of, it doesn't, like, we all know that person who they'll just, regardless of being a reasonable person 24 hours ago, it's utilitarian in this moment to accept a certain position or argument because they don't really care about it. And it's that on a kind of wider scale when it comes to just the fact that MRAs don't moderate these types of people out of their movement. That's why I like what the True Puka has been calling them recently, right of left liberals. These people that are liberal in all these mainstream political opinions, but anytime it comes to social justice and stuff, are regressive as possible. Mm-hmm. They're denialists. Every issue that comes up when it comes to social justice is something that needs to be dismissed at all costs.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like this, and I mean, of course, people on our side of things also fall into this, but there's this like all or nothing kind of attitude. Like I, aside from the people who just bitch and moan about how great women have it, which we don't really engage with. But the men's rights activists who actually have real issues, they talk about, you know, like suicide, and they talk about imprisonment rates or I don't know, military service or something. We listen to these people, right? But so often they drift off into this all or nothing attitude where, because of these issues, therefore, like, women don't have issues, or feminism all around sucks, or they just make these sweeping accusations and dismiss fellow gender egalitarian movement, which is feminism, and it's absurd, you know, that there needs to be a kind of a middle ground. You know, people can have issues without one being the oppressor 100% of the time. You know, it's ridiculous to then jump into like, oh, therefore it's a gynarchy. Are you fucking God? Just absurd.
Part of the issue there is the conflation of oppression with having issues. And that, too, is part of the problem, is that when you try and pin these people down on the substance, what they're getting at are issues that are peripheral to the patriarchy and affect men. Because, again, as feminists always say, gender roles hurt everyone. They suck for everyone. That's kind of the fucking point. We're taking individual people and sticking them into a box they don't necessarily fucking fit into. That's the whole problem. And they're saying that, like, these issues that are actually caused by the patriarchy, they have to avoid the substance of the actual root of this issue, and they treat having those issues as equivalent to oppression, because it's like, well, now they're treating it like feminists are oppressing men. Like when they talk about circumcision, like they lay it at the feet of feminists as though feminists are responsible for the tradition of circumcision, when this is based on ignorance of history. And again, this is what I say, like, every single one of their arguments is utilitarian, that it is what they need to argue in the moment and doesn't have to be consistent with reality, doesn't have to be consistent with an overall principle or view or ideology or anything. It's entirely reactionary. And that's one main problem you find when it comes to trying to give credence to men's rights activists as a group, to the movement, so to speak, because an organized movement that is in favor of addressing men's issues, issues that men face by dint of being men, doesn't exist. The actual organization doesn't exist. And this rabble of anti-feminists doesn't deserve the respect of being seen as actually having those words apply to them, which again is the whole kind of the whole.
Sorry, it's an interesting point that got discussed during the blackout between part 1 and part 2 of this live chat. We mentioned how MRAs or the MRM has become like a dirty, toxic kind of word, when really it should be the anti-feminists, and yet nobody has a problem identifying as anti-feminists. They're literally a counter-reactionary, identifying as counter a human rights movement. Whereas, I mean, nobody goes around saying that they're anti-MRAs. I mean, at least we don't. There isn't, like, that would be dumb. Like, if when you break down what MRA means, you know, like men's rights movement. Okay, why would you be against men's rights? That makes no sense. So we wouldn't identify as anti MRAs. We would identify as anti-feminists.
It would be just as ridiculous as identifying as, say, anti-social justice.
Right. I mean, I understand I understand that they have like a whole different interpretation of what the movement means, but it is besides the point completely. Mm-hmm. It's what do the words mean? Why would you be against that? Okay, you can be against certain types of actions. You need to be clear what kind of actions you're against. You need to be clear what kind of people you're against. Just saying that you're against feminism is very ill thought out. We'll put it like that.
Yeah, I've told people about, like, when they talk against feminism, it's like feminism is a multifaceted group and organization of different groups, many of which actively even dislike each other. And so to assign specifics to the movement as a whole beyond the most basic definition is inherently fallacious and problematic. But they treat saying that as a no true Scotsman fallacy, when in fact that's the equivalent of saying, it would be a no true Scotsman fallacy if, say, I was to say that someone who doesn't, like, if someone believes in the divinity of Christ, if we're talking about, say, Christians, for example, I wanted to make a no true Scotsman fallacy about them. Uh-huh. If I said that based on some specific belief of theirs, they weren't really a Christian, despite the fact that they do believe in the divinity of Christ, it's a no true Scotsman fallacy because they're still a fucking Christian by what the actual definition is. Uh-huh. But when we make these points, we're saying that people shouldn't generalize, and when we say that person isn't really a feminist, we're making an argument that is manifested in the labels based on the substance of whether or not we disagree with them on the substance of what we actually believe, what the ideology actually means. Like questions of, what does equality mean? What does freedom and liberty mean? Do we care about equality or equity? These are the kinds of things that are of actual substance that we need to debate, that nobody ever debates when they debate against feminism. They just assume that feminism isn't about equality because It has the feminine because we have a superficial understanding of the shit that was given to us by some propagandist that we need to parrot to other people because we don't actually know what we're talking about. And that's again, the issue. You're trying to have these are people that shouldn't be in a debate. These are people that need to read a fucking book.
Yeah. As far as the No True Scotsman thing, going back to your Christian example, somebody identifying, like, we would never say that somebody isn't a feminist if they identify as a feminist. We would then ask them, like, do you know what feminism means? Like, do you agree with this definition, of this very humanist definition? They say yes, and then they go on to just completely contradict themselves. We would go so far as to say they're not feminists, because, I mean, it's not really our place, I guess, to say it, and it would just be baiting people with the whole No True Scotsman thing. But we can say they're not very good feminists. They're not very good at it. It's kind of it's not an important thing to them, as opposed to whatever other contradictory things they believe in. So
whatever feminism they do subscribe to is one that we don't, and so maybe you should have a conversation with us and not about them.
Right, and when they fight these strawmen of, like, all feminists need to believe this, all feminists need to believe that, it's very simple. If it's beyond the basic definition, then it's negotiable. And so, like, for instance, the Christian example, where, like, oh, they believe in Jesus as the Messiah, and therefore they're Christian. Technically true, but there's also a whole slew of doctrine that is attached to what it means to be Christian. You need to believe everything in the New Testament. You need to believe everything in the Old Testament. These are things that Jesus taught as truth. So there is degrees of how committed you are. And,
well, you see, that's my point, though, is when it comes to that, it's a matter of interpretation. It doesn't matter, like, whether or not you believe everything that's in the New Testament or not. It's a matter of, like, you know, like, even if you believe it, if you don't believe it, how you're interpreting it. Whereas when it comes to feminism and positions like that, that's the rub of that fallacious analogy, is that feminism has substance that people can debate, like, in a secular context. And when people analogize it to religion, it doesn't fucking fit.
Yeah, agreed. If there is any anti-feminists or men's rights activists in the chat who would like to challenge us, since this is kind of a circle jerk at the moment, we were just basically planning on talking about how, like, our various approaches to dealing with, to distinguishing between men's rights activists and anti-feminists and whatnot. But if somebody would like to actually speak up, by all means, leave a message in the chat, and Ivy, as the moderator, should pick up on that. But
where you wanted to go?
Well, see, my main problem with entering this arena of debate that exists between feminists and men's rights activists is that if you really look at the true definitions of what both of these movements should be about, which is advocating for the rights of a specific group of people, right? You know, in this case, men's rights activists wish to advocate, at least in theory, for the rights of men, to further the causes of men and make them better off, which in theory should not include the worsening of another group of people to do this. Like, in reality, everybody should be able to all benefit in some way from people becoming better, more liberated, and more, I guess, free. But most of the people who wear the men's rights activists or movement label that I have dealt with over my time have ended up making it about, almost completely about, if not actually completely about, how feminism is bad for men. And it's almost like you can have an entire debate with these people where they mention not a single thing about the causes that actually trouble men, but they are instead entirely, completely talking about what feminists are doing, what feminists are saying, what feminists are advocating. And this is their whole conversation as a men's rights activist, is What are feminists doing? What are feminists saying? Feminists aren't talking enough about male rape. Feminists aren't talking enough about custody. Feminists aren't, or they are. And when it comes down to, you listen to all of what they're saying generally, it's not about, well, I think that men have this problem. I think that men have this problem. It's about, I think that men are disadvantaged by women, and this is all of the problems. And
Yeah.
when you can't get past that single point that we're just going to blame women for every problem that we could possibly say that men have, there's not much of a further discussion to have, because obviously saying that men are the sole victims of a gynocracy or whatever, and that all problems, like men can't, women aren't drafted the same way that men are, or men are dying in combat while women aren't, and just laying that at the feet of women is entirely to ignore how the system of our government and the military formed, and how it was men who made this decision that said that women aren't capable of combat, that women aren't capable of making these particular decisions, and that they, in fact, should be excluded from it by a very male-dominated system. But somehow in the end, when a lot of these people lay it out, it somehow becomes, oh yeah, we can see that.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes somehow the fault of women at the end. And that's where they lose me, when, without offering any fully factual arguments about why somehow that women did all of this, despite the fact that if you make an objective study of history, that most of history and the policies that we follow that were started, hundreds of years ago, were made by male-dominated cultures and passed by male-dominated legislative bodies, that yet you're saying this is women's fault. It doesn't equate. It doesn't work. And when they approach the rest of their arguments from this point, you can't have a good, logical, well-thought-out debate, because they're arguing from the position of insanity almost.
Yeah, I definitely take your point. It's just, I think that more than harming feminism, they're harming the idea of a movement that is for the rights of men.
Yes,
that's what pisses me off the most about what they do.
Yeah, but they make it so that in general, it seems like I wouldn't even say the loudest voices. The majority of voices seem to be pushing these conspiracy theories and just generally conflate it with anti-feminism. And I have met actual men's rights advocates who are not also anti-feminists. It's possible,
Well, especially historically, that's that used to be a thing, was pro-feminist MRAs.
Yeah.
Way back when the idea kind of started. But specific examples, I mean, The Amazing Atheist did this, and I completely lost it. I hate my ADHD.
Amazing Atheist said something?
No, but it was what we were just talking about before.
In response to one of the questions in the chat, we don't condone any misinformation. We want real facts, and we condemn anybody who spreads misinformation, up to and including fellow feminists or fellow atheists. The truth is strong enough to stand on its own.
The problem is when you consider misinformation to be saying things like about the wage gap as a general number, and then, well, we're going to whittle it down to where it's women's choices and the 5% and the things and the blood. It's like, no, the number was fucking accurate for what the fuck they were talking about.
Well, see, that's fighting information with misinformation, which should not be condoned anywhere for any reason. Fact should lay out the rest of what you're doing. If what you're doing is not based on the factual circumstances of your situation, then it's absurdity. You can't do anything to fix reality if you don't first pay attention to what reality currently is.
That was it.
That's for anyone.
With the Amazing Atheist example, He, in I believe it was his Failure of Feminism video, talked about how like he got to a point where he said that it's like these people aren't allowing people later in life to choose to be circumcised instead of just having it done as a matter of course, laying at the feet of feminism a tradition of patriarchal religions that he should fucking be against. And that's the cognitive dissonance that makes no goddamn sense. And the operating from premises that are completely outside of reality, trying to argue a point that is good. It's good to say, yes, boys should not be circumcised as a matter of course for no good goddamn reason. Totally on board with you. Now, if you'd stop blaming feminists as though we want this when, hey, feminist here saying I don't, never have, people have come at me saying that I apparently want to mutilate the genitals of young boys, despite the fact that my only fucking video on my channel about the topic is asking, in the title, why would you do this? And these are the people that you're trying to have a debate with. And it's like, no, there's such a narrow margin of people, such a small percentage of people who are willing to have a conversation that operates from reality.
And as far as this like dogma that they like to prescribe to feminists, like all feminists must believe X, Y, and Z, outside of the basic definition of the humanist values, like patriarchy, for example, right? They say this word with this kind of scorn.
Yes.
This from motherfucking atheists who not moments ago just got finished criticizing a literal patriarchal monotheistic Abrahamic religion. Patriarchal. It's right there in the name. Do you think that they have no influence in society today? Then what are you even being an atheist for? Obviously they have influence in policy. You don't think that carries over into gender roles in terms of social axiom, in terms of modern day, be it first world or not? I mean, it's absurdity that they can like get done riling against a literal patriarchy in one breath and then turn around and be like, ha ha ha, they believe in a patriarchy. What are you smoking? Fuck.
Well, you see, yeah, and they obviously don't operate in reality on the broad strokes in that sense, but then of course when you get to the subtleties, when you get to the questions of like what constitutes a joke that goes too far, and unfortunately they don't understand that we're trying to address an issue of this causes harm in what it perpetuates in the society, and this is where they get into the sociology denialism and science denialism that again equates them so perfectly with Christian apologists, where they're like the Christian apologists that try to argue against evolution without having any real understanding of it. Mm-hmm. Actually, this question you brought up has been in the chat. Equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. Would it be good to frame the debates in that sense? And I don't think so, because I think that precisely misses the point. Is when we talk about equity, that's a big thing I brought up recently, delineating feminists from egalitarians who don't realize the limitations of egalitarianism, where we're dealing with equality versus equity. Equality of opportunity doesn't address the issue of we all have equal opportunity, but we don't have equal access to those opportunities. The opportunity is there. It's that orange that's 8 feet tall. I like this example from Cat Black, that there's an orange that's like 8 feet tall up on a tree, and someone who's like 6 feet or 7 feet tall is just going to have to barely hop to like grab it. Someone who's 5 feet tall is going to have to get a step ladder. Someone who is 2 feet tall is going to have a whole ladder to be able to reach this thing. So even if there's an equality of opportunities, it's a matter of people having access to them. But there's still the individual's merit of what they can do. But we don't have unreasonable expectations for them. Mm-hmm. We have an understanding of each individual's actual abilities, and we have expectations that draw from that.
Okay. Well, so for instance, like maybe we differ with you a little bit on this point. In our we called it sexism of sexual dimorphism, only in the sense that it can be applied in policy as sexist. Not that sexual dimorphism is somehow inherently sexist, just that there's obviously differences between males and females. But for instance, they would say. No, let me restart. They is way too vague. So, on the topic of, say, women in being allowed in combat roles, okay, those backwards countries that still refuse to do this, despite the legions of legendary women throughout history and in modern day that have scored kill counts that would make Rambo blush. We are for the opportunity for women to be in those roles, provided they can meet the standards. So we don't want to like lower the standards, which seems to be like a thing that they're always worried about. The same thing with like sports. We would like to see a more integrated system of sports where it isn't just like men's sports and women's sports. Like we would like to see integration, even if that means that women are usually in the lower echelons. Fine. We would like to see that, at least that access of opportunity, as you say, first. As far as I'm not sure how you intend to make things more equitable from that point onward. Could you address that?
Well, I know that at least my initial response, keep in mind what you want to say because I want you to go, but specifically what you said about the military type thing. For example, the sex differences they have in the expectations for PT, for the physical training. They have sexist expectations. Depending on your sex, they have different standards.
Yeah.
And I used to think that that was a bad thing until I found out the actual reason, that it's based on meritorious things concerning body size and shape and things of that nature that don't actually affect whether or not you are able to perform your duties. And so,
but then it should be based on the body muscle mass and height and weight and all those things, not segregated by gender arbitrarily, right?
I would agree with that. Like I'm not saying that I agree with it, but at the same time, it's like I can at least understand why it's there type idea. But good.
Yes. See, I think the point should be based on two distinct categories. First off, is the meritorious opportunity we're talking about something necessary for one's survival? First off, like having the ability to do something with which one can survive should never be, I guess, delineated based on one's merit or capability beyond a certain, I guess, very basic point. One should always have the ability to survive. Merit and capability, I don't think, should factor in past that point. Once we're talking about should you eat or not, well, if you're alive, you should eat.
It's what you talked about when it comes to capitalism. It can only be moral if people at the lowest point are taken care of.
Exactly. Where there should not be a point in your system where your merit falls so low that you should just be not allowed access to any point of resources at all.
Oh, you're homeless? We're going to put those spikes down for you.
Yeah, no. You're homeless, but that does not in any way actually devalue the basic existence of your person, that you can experience need, want, pain, and fear. This is not in any way truly devalued by your lessening of capabilities. It's like someone who's mentally challenged. We should not, just, let them die. They can't perform any useful tasks for us. No. They're a living being that can experience pain and want and need, and
so
even
roll this back into the feminism conversation, please.
Yes.
I feel like we're going off a little bit.
The idea for feminism in this case becomes that when we're talking about, a meritocratic system where we're talking about, there's differences between men and women, this is true and should be applied in certain contexts. It becomes, I think, an incredibly contextual point of argument where in certain distinct contexts, like for soldiers especially, let's go there for a moment, a soldier should have certain basic expectations of their capabilities, regardless of gender. And if women cannot meet these expectations as easily, well, based on the very life and death requirements of a soldier, well, then less women should get in. This is specific to the job. If allowing more women in by lowering the standards places everybody's life at risk, well, then this is not acceptable. But let's talk about sports then. We could allow women in, and yes, they may possibly be at a higher risk. If you allow a petite woman to play football, she could possibly be at a greater risk of injury due to being tackled. However, if she understands these risks, and this is not something that is life and death for other people, but is a choice one is making, well, then I think there should be that equality of opportunity that exists. You may compete in this thing. You may become injured more likely, but if you understand these risks and nobody else is disadvantaged by doing this, really, then go for it.
And like going back to the military thing, that's like where there wasn't a meritorious difference when they had the differing standards between the two, which is what the rationalization there is.
Fact needs to inform all of this. If we understand the facts behind, let's say, military, again, that a soldier expected to do this sort of thing needs to be able to lift X amount of weight often.
Like you say, it's very contextualized,
exactly.
What skills they need and what specific areas and what's relevant and what's not. And
exactly,
why.
And the total effect of what's going on. Allowing women to have equal opportunity access to, like civil service jobs generally doesn't put anybody at greater harm, even if they don't have the same capabilities. Like, this just a thing. Having them have this opportunity puts nobody at any significant disadvantage.
Yeah,
versus...
well, my general objection to all of, I mean, not necessarily anything that you said, but just like in general, the intentional segregation of the sexes is it shouldn't be viewed in the male-female context at all. I don't think it should be viewed on an individual basis. Can this soldier, doesn't matter if it's male or female, perform this duty? Yes, no, okay. Simple as that. Same with applying for, I don't know, like some prestigious sports team or something. Doesn't matter if they're male or female. Shouldn't matter. Now, it doesn't matter if you end up with mostly males and very few females. Okay, that's not the point. The point is, as the question was, access of opportunity. We should be gender blind, I think, in this sense. And I don't think that is naive at all, because you're generalizing half the human population if you're just going to rule out women altogether because they tend to be petite or whatever. I mean, it's absurd, and that's nothing. That's not to say at all that this is just basic biology we're talking about. We're not even talking about their life experience, what kind of skills they've honed that may very well more than make up for any kind of one-on-one physical differences they may have with like a male opponent or something. So it's I think extremely just dumb to segregate genders on any for any reason, really.
It sounds kind of silly to put it this way, but gender and sex shouldn't be considered relevant where they're irrelevant. Like when it comes to bathroom segregation, for example. There's no motherfucking reason to segregate them based on sex. Period. There isn't a discussion. We know this, so that discussion is over now, and there's no reason to segregate the bathrooms based on sex. There's no merit to that whatsoever. There are much better ways to segregate bathrooms, say based on, for example, people who want to take a while with their little boutique and fixing their makeup and so on and so forth, on top of people who would rather use the equivalent to their urinal get out. or something to that effect, a question of how much privacy you want. In general, American bathrooms have a problem with this anyway, of they're much more open, to my understanding, and don't provide as much privacy as bathrooms in other countries. And the idea of gender and sex simply shouldn't be discussed in this context because it's not relevant.
Yep.
Well, if I could offer a little something to that, it shouldn't be relevant. But the point is that, the fact that we have a sociological context that informs these two genders, and women will have certain lesser opportunities in fields based on this sociological expectation that's sort of built into the culture, that women can't do as well at X, Y, or Z, or that they just won't be as successful at like the STEM fields or whatever, and so are less picked by people. A woman in draft would probably, to start, I'm going to go out on a limb, but I think it's pretty accurate, be less likely to be picked, simply because of this sociological expectation that exists in culture that says that women have certain roles and men have certain roles, which disadvantages women, let's say, in particular fields like for soldiers. They may be allowed all of the combat roles and whatever, but how likely is it for people to pick them for these things? How likely is it for any particular, commanding officer to recommend them based on their own particular prejudices?
And so this is where
when people bring that up as a point of, as though that's a privilege for men too,
and it's not.
That's another thing, is that when we're trying to have these conversations with MRAs and people who actually want to learn about these things and such, that they purposely don't understand those concepts, where they'll conflate the fact that women are disadvantaged in an area with them being advantaged because, well, they don't have to be the actual soldiers. They have to be the one holding the white feather.
Well, and, it misses the actual point that, yes, women are not as equally considered for combat roles, but this is not because women are being, the view that fuels this is not that we need to, make women unable to die in combat and that only men deserve this fate, but that it's women are not capable of this thing and that only men are powerful enough to do this. It's really, you have to look at the prejudice that informs the action to say what it is about. Like, if they're saying that, if men were all about, let's say, preventing women from going into combat because, well, we think that they'll die and that it's bad for them entirely and that we're protecting them, it wouldn't be better, but it would at least fit more in line with this idea that these men's rights activists have about the prejudice that goes into it, instead of this very anti-feminist idea that they're not capable of these roles, that a woman is too fragile, too dainty to even perform these quote-unquote gritty roles that men are responsible for.
Well, what kind of burns me up about that is that when combat roles are brought up as part of the gender discussion by anti-feminists, it tends to be from people who live in like the USA, for example, where there is no draft and it's a volunteer force, which I was a part of, and they act as though it's a great disservice to them, as though they're really sacrificing something by being male and by women not being eligible for a draft that's not enforced anymore.
When the literal effect is the fact that they have to sign a dotted line at some point.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, we at the same time you have other countries like my sister in Israel who was drafted. And she was a scout sniper, and she saw plenty of action. So these literal ridiculous first world problems are just amazing to me, that they would bring this up as though it's a disadvantage for men when it's clearly a statement on the role of women in society, something that disadvantages women as opposed to men. Women belong here. They're not good enough. That's what it says.
Exactly. Where when we have an equality of opportunity, at least on the surface, the problem with the idea is that it often, and it is a problem with some people at least who say we want to be gender blind, is that they also take the further step of ignoring the social discrimination that underlies the system, whether like the rights exist so everything is equal, ignoring the fact that they may have the, on paper, rights to do the same things as men, but when women first got the right to vote, at least, here in America, they would be turned away for trumped up reasons. They had the right, but the prejudice in the culture still denied them. Same with the civil rights movement, where black people were given freedoms and then sociologically denied them, though the rights were on paper.
These are the people who ask the question, can you name me one right that women are denied that men have? It's like, okay, let's ask you a different question. Let's look at this. All right. So the fact that over 100% of the black population of Manhattan was stopped and frisked is not racist because they weren't missing any rights, right? No, because you're purposely not understanding the actual issues we are trying to address. Literally, the context of the issues, which is sociological issues. You're purposely ignoring that as an entire category of issues that can exist, with the question that is your attempt to search for the inequalities that women face.
Yeah. Yeah, like, oh, but of course we have to go here because we're feminists, Gotta fill the trope, because rape is illegal, therefore there's no problem. Rape is a crime. Crimes get persecuted. What are you whining about? No big deal.
Yeah.
Men are the ones that are disadvantaged because men aren't recognized as the ones that can get raped or whatnot, as though that's not a gender issue that feminism addresses. Or seeks to address, at least. If they bring up instances of feminists who argue against making men like part of the category that is capable of being raped, and that is abhorrent and counter what feminism is about. That's an example of not being feminists.
You guys, I think you guys did a chat at some point with Mike Parker. Captain McCool here on YouTube. He's awesome. And
I don't think he did.
Sorry, what?
I don't think so.
Really? Oh, you guys missed out then. He's great. He's good people. He's one of those people who actually deserves the term men's rights activist, but purposely doesn't wear it because it's so toxic type idea. But he made a video talking about the Duluth model and the issues with it. And this is a thing that the Duluth model does pose issues for disqualifying men as being abused and only being included as abusers. And these are criticisms that can be lobbed inside of feminism towards our own model that we can then improve on. That's the whole idea. And, like, for example, I agree that there are obvious issues with it. That the point is that MRAs will see this then as something that is against men, as opposed to this is a vast improvement on what used to be a culture of let's just not talk about this and silently accept this issue as just being an issue that isn't really an issue. But they don't see the Duluth model as an improvement on that can then be further improved upon. And they treat everything as, again, it's a black or white issue. You have to be against feminism. You can't try to improve feminist ideas inside of feminism. That's one thing that bothers me, is that the anti-feminism has invaded the men's rights advocacy, because I wish that people would rally under the umbrella of feminism to advocate for men where they do have issues. And again, this is a thing where it's like, maybe they aren't oppressed. Sure, that's a thing you can argue. But they have actual issues. Now, are they by dint of them being men and also as a result of some other group oppressing them? Rich men, you can say. You can parse it out to that point. The upper classes of men set rules for the society at large that disadvantage men that are poor and such. But again, none of this is a point against feminism. All of this is stuff that should be worked on inside of feminism. If you think that feminism should be specifically worried about addressing gender issues instead of just advocating for women, there are those different areas inside of feminism as well. People who think that feminism is specifically about women's empowerment, those who are specifically radical, those who think that feminism is supposed to be about gender issues in general, and people who focus on LGBT issues, so on and so forth. There's so many different brands of it where you can find where you can find a group of people to rally to affect change on an issue that you care about, and these people purposely choose not to, and instead be reactionaries against feminism, when that's completely counterproductive to the purpose of advocating for men's rights, because I guarantee you that feminists would be on your side if you chose to work with them. And any opposition that they see to that, any slight form of opposition, is the equivalent of that idea that Christians are being persecuted, where they cry persecution at every fucking turn, despite the fact that there's no goddamn evidence of it.
Well,
so the I guess this kind of I've got 2 points. The first being this kind of brings into light the idea we've been kind of tossing around in terms of, would it be a good thing if to play into the hands of our critics, if feminism had a pope? As if it's a religion, right? Like if it had a centralized authority that was like, this is feminist and this is radical bullshit that has nothing to do with our humanist values.
I like the idea of peer review. The idea that we continue to, based on our differences, use that as strength to continue to improve our ideas continuously through skeptical inquiry, understanding the evidence, and experts in the relevant fields criticizing each other's ideas so that we build our ideas. It's a matter of progress versus being regressive, like the people who want to criticize the concept of privilege. It's like, no, we're describing something meaningful in reality that we're having a discussion about. And if you want to, like, be a goddamn child and wave your hands about how, you know, privilege isn't actually a thing, then you can go sit at the kids' table, because we're having a conversation about terms that actually mean something, instead of just questioning the terms and not actually forwarding anything meaningful. It's, again, a matter of vacuity versus substance. We have substance to have conversations about, whereas they have a position of ignorance from which to criticize something they never took 2 seconds to understand in the first place. This is the main problem I find with MRAs and anti-feminists in general, is that their response to articles about issues of feminism is to not read them. And when they do read them, it's entirely from their own premises that, again, are not based in reality.
Well, there's this concept you like to bring up about charity to arguments made against you.
Carl Sagan.
You take an opponent's argument against your ideas from a perception of open-mindedness, where rather than looking at this argument is against me and so it must be wrong,
I'm willing to take your argument on its own terms.
Exactly. And gauge your argument based on the merits you present and then compare it to mine. And I find that so often you don't get that charity from most of the anti-feminist / MRA combined movement, where you will present an argument against what they're saying, and it may be well thought out, have research, whatever, and it's treated immediately with derision because it dares to disagree with their preconceptions about either your movement or how reality works. And rather than saying, I read your article and factually I disagree with it on these points, they'll say, well, your article obviously is biased because a known feminist wrote it, and so I don't have to read it to know that it's filled with this claptrap.
Right. Well, and I mean, that surely goes both ways in many respects, you know, in terms of feminists who don't want to entertain legitimate issues that men have, that we'll say legitimate men's rights activists try to put forward. or
it's a huge problem.
yeah, or like somebody's like, oh, like a Christian being like, oh, Dawkins wrote that. Pfft, that's got to be all part of the science conspiracy or whatever against us. Yeah, so it's the problem I think that we run into is that the gatekeepers of our respective movements tend to be the most rabid. The self-appointed gatekeepers really jump on any outsider that comes in that dares question the accepted narrative, and scares them away, basically, kind of confirming all the negative tropes without the outsider, be it a feminist going to an MRA circle or an MRA going to a feminist circle. And I'm not saying they're equivalent, but that they get chased away before they get to meet anybody who would be open to actual conversation. And so obviously we all would like, all of us lucid people, I guess, would like for more open dialogue, more honest discussion that isn't just a bunch of copy-paste, arguments that we've all heard a million times.
Yeah, I see, but that's again the false equivalence where what I find is when people are scared away by feminists because they're demonized immediately for some reason, tends to be because they didn't educate themselves ahead of time, as opposed to with MRAs and anti-feminists where you're demonized immediately because you disagree, and that's the difference. Where feminists are very harsh about the fact that you're trying to talk about stuff when you didn't read any basic articles about this thing, and you're trying to learn about it through conversation and through kind of like probing people, and it so easily so quickly gets close to sea lining, where people are asking disingenuous questions and being question sayers, and not actually intending to learn. These are the same kind of way that Christian apologists very often. I like the videos that you mirrored by Christy Winters about this, that talk about apologists in general and can be specifically applied to anti-feminists, where they will dance around the issue and they won't address the substance most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate my ADHD. God damn it.
Well, I mean, by all means, come back to it if it comes back to you. But the other point that I wanted to raise was just to give some context, probably entirely too late in this conversation, for the audience of what prompted this conversation to begin with. Was a meme that we put up that essentially, and maybe we'll link it below, but it said, passively believing in basic human rights makes one an egalitarian and or humanist. A feminist or MRA engages in activism to make those values a reality. So you took umbrage with the inclusion of MRA to that.
Yeah, and again, this is what the original disagreement was about, that a question of how you gauge a movement, how do you actually judge the movement, by the actions of the predominant members of that movement or by what the movement is on paper. And I think the obvious answer is that it's a combination of the two, and it's context specific, where you judge the movement in general when you're talking about it, obviously, and its general actions. But when you're dealing with an individual, you don't want to be prejudiced against them because of the labels that they choose to wear. So an individual may legitimately deserve to be called a men's rights activist by what the words actually literally mean, because they advocate for men's rights and actually care about these issues. And the issue is delineating between them and the disingenuous anti-feminists who are reactionaries. Because when you just say MRAs, just like put it out there as, yeah, that's like a group that actually cares about this stuff, that isn't just tacitly in favor of equality and stuff. By and large, the MRA is not in favor of equality at all. And it's an issue of, to what degree do you conflate the MRA or the MRM with anti-feminism? To what degree is the MRM as a group anti-feminist? And it seems at least to be almost entirely anti-feminist, and that anyone who wouldn't be anti-feminist inside of it is immediately moderated out by the anti-feminists, and anybody who would be seriously in favor of men's rights can't be a pro-feminist MRA, which again would get to the actual substance of their issues. The way to solve their problems is to be a feminist, to be in favor of gender equality, to be in favor of dismantling these harmful gender roles. But anti-feminists are regressive, and so the degree to which they conflate themselves by choice means that the term itself has been branded and co-opted by anti-feminists. And so people who would want to be in favor of actual men's rights, you should be fair to people, to individuals that you talk to, and you should take them as individuals and what they have to say as individuals, and be fair to the fact that men do have issues. Again, you can have disagreements about whether or not they're oppressed and where you draw the line between men having issues and being oppressed and bullshit like that. That's not really important. But you can't really have a conversation with the disingenuous propagandist parrots. And so you've got to not spread yourself too thin by trying to deal with those people when you're trying to just educate people. The kind of people that shouldn't be engaged in a debate but need to be educated about these things because they don't operate in reality. Again, going back to the idea of, like, do you have evolutionary biologists debating with Christian apologists about evolution when the Christian apologists deny evolution? It doesn't make any motherfucking sense. And so the idea that you include that automatically when the term has been so toxified, the people who would be rightly labeled that wouldn't want to wear it because of what it actually represents and what it's tied up with. And so it's really problematic to kind of give that olive branch to people in that kind of a general way, unfortunately, I think. It's trying to give credit to these people where they don't deserve it as a group. They may as individuals, but as a group, they definitely have demonstrated that they deserve disrespect as opposed to respect. These are people who purposely obfuscate conversations with disingenuous bullshit from a position of ignorance as opposed to trying to engage and progress a conversation based on understanding it.
So, and your argument in terms of them saying the same thing about feminism would be just that it's a false equivalence because feminism
yeah,
is
it's again, they treat it as equivalent because it's all they have. All they have are what's the word I'm looking for? Not damn it. They elevate themselves to the idea that they actually have substance. They have nothing but superficial things like that kind of false equivalence, where they treat themselves automatically as just a foregone conclusion that they are actually the equivalent to what feminists do, that they are people who are advocating for men's rights. They completely eliminate the anti-feminism from this equivalence when they make it. That they treat it as though they are men's rights activists who deserve the name, and that that's all they do, and at the same time are being anti-feminist by forwarding the same conspiracy theories with feminism as their Illuminati about preventing them from being able to advocate for their own issues while they do nothing. Their response to the defunding of Survivors UK is a perfect case study, where, what did you hear from them? Crickets. Because they don't give a fuck about forwarding men's issues, about forwarding men's liberation from whatever, or whatever you want to call it. They don't actually care. They care about being reactionaries against feminists.
So what would you ascribe as the reason that these anti-feminist tactics are not considered, as you say, toxic to identify as an anti-feminist, as opposed to identifying something that is supposed to be a good thing, like an MRA? Why is MRA toxic, whereas anti-feminist is not?
Oh, they both should be, but
Well, I would actually say that it's been very much reversed, where MRA in its theoretical concept should not be a vilified thing, but anti-feminist should be, where you have this group by its title and label, the MRA, men's rights activists, who, if you had a larger collection of people, men that were sitting there saying, we are advocating for men's rights in areas where men are disadvantaged, and following that to its conclusion, then I think, in fact, you would see that they would not be vilified at all. You would have anti-feminists being vilified, with MRAs being allowed to stand on their own arguments more. But the problem is that the MRA is, by and large, at least the MRA as a movement that we see as a bloc, is really a sock puppet for the anti-feminist conspiracy ideas, where rather than, they stand for, I guess what they stand for is the idea of persecution instead of enabling, where they want to be a victim of a cause, that they look at their, the activism of men's rights as pointing out who's victimizing us instead of pointing out where we need to improve. Like, you have this problem in feminism too, where you have certain groups of feminists who want to pin all of the problems that women face on men actively, where all of the women's problems have come from men, and everything wrong with being a woman is because there's some sexist pig at the top making it happen. And unfortunately, though, the difference comes in the numbers of the people that believe these radicalized conspiratorial ideas, where in feminism, these groups exist, and they have a presence, and you can hear them being rabid.
But they are seen as radical. And again, with the MRA, that's what mainly comprises it. They aren't marginalized in the movement.
Where, in feminist movements, you will see a lot of what I would call moderate, reasonable feminists listening to the, women sitting there saying that all men should be castrated and the penis is a weapon because they exist, that they're being marginalized. You'll see a lot of, more moderate feminists saying, no, that's completely batshit insanity. That, no, that's not at all what we actually should be doing. But when you have a men's rights activist person wearing the label who say that, that all problems that men face come from a secret gynatorial conspiracy group that somehow runs the world with their magic vaginas or something, that this is not questioned by the mainstream MRAs, that they don't go, hold on, that's a bunch of crap, and we don't want to be associated with anything to do with those ideas. There's no loud outpouring of criticism of this that says, no, this is not us. In fact, it's more of a tacit sort of acceptance of, I may not personally believe that, but we're still both MRAs, and I'm not going to go out of my way to challenge this. So, versus, again, with feminism, you have that challenge where the woman's saying the crazy thing over there, and the other, women and people involved in the feminist movement are saying, no, that's too much.
Like, feminist groups that I belong to on Facebook have effectively moderated all white feminists out of their groups unless they're lurking, because anytime they bring up their ideas, they are challenged on those ideas.
Because they're white?
Of course, because they're guilty. How dare they?
No,
okay.
It's
that's so. I'm not sure I follow how that's a good thing. Silencing an ethnic group.
Well, no, I'm joking. They're moderated out in that. What I mean by white feminists, obviously, is those that are racist, are not the kinds that would say all lives matter type idea.
Because there are the white feminists. The label more specifically generally applies to a feminist who is concerned, about feminist issues, but then sort of tries to remove the specific context to, let's say, a black woman's issues versus a white woman's issues. They try to say that, your particular issues, being a black woman or Mexican woman, are invalidated because you're a woman.
These are the exact feminists that are being addressed in the overall movement by intersectional feminists.
Where they sort of look at my issues as a white feminist must be like every woman's issues as a feminist, regardless of whiteness, blackness, whatever. And when they bring up, well, I'm a black feminist and I have it a little worse than you because I'm black as well, they go, no, we're all women. Why don't you see that?
No, the wage gap is this number because that's what it is for white women. Never mind the fact that it's much worse for black women and much, much worse for Hispanic women.
And that's the problem you get with this, what's called white feminism, is where to put it very simply, it's where you have the white privilege coming out in the feminist movement and saying that our problems as, middle-class white women are indicative of the problems of lower-class black women and illegal immigrant Mexican women. They're all the same.
Or if you do try and bring up your issues as being different from white women's, well, you're just, weighing down the movement, or you're distracting from our issues, or you're somehow a traitor in some way. Either way, again, the whole point is that these are the people who are being challenged. These are the people who are having their bad ideas challenged inside of the movement, precisely because they're bad ideas.
From that intersectional perspective, what would be your take on like what we do in terms of talking about we take our cues from ex-Muslims and from liberal Muslims who speak out against Islam and its treatment of women, homosexuals, things like that, and we speak what they speak, basically. Like we mirror their videos, we use their talking points when talking to people who say feminism isn't like necessary or whatever, for instance. What would be intersectional feminism's take on the fact that I'm Slavic, technically east of the Caucasian mountains? So not actually Caucasian, but I look like it, right? And Harley and Ivy are white for all intents and purposes, right? So would it be unacceptable for three white-looking people to be talking about Muslim issues, be talking about the fact that women in the Middle East are being enslaved? Should we shut our mouths about that because we're not Arabs?
Well, of course, these are basic questions about how to be a good ally to any particular group, and obviously it's a question of taking your cues from that group. With what specifically you're talking about, I know that there are potential issues, at least, with a lot of the specific people you're taking your cues from. Kevin Logan made a video to that effect earlier today.
We'll be doing a reply to him.
It's an interesting discussion that can be had there, I'm sure. I don't know, because I don't know enough about Muslim issues specifically. It's one of those areas I haven't read about very much, and even then, again, it's one of those things of taking cues from these people. And so the specific people that you may be taking your cues from, there may be issues with them, obviously, because everybody needs to be questioned. So.
Well, if I had to offer something on that, I guess the problem with it can become that if you're taking your cues, talking about a particular different group from your own issues, and you're taking cues from a certain section of that group, you may very much be talking about only one group's view of this. When you say, well, this is a problem for Muslims, when you're taking your cue from, let's say, liberal, westernized Muslims, let's say, then you may not be speaking from the same grounds as, let's say, millions of Muslims located in a very different region of the world.
No, none of the ones that we cite as our examples that Kevin Logan talked about. They were Somalian-born, Iranian-born, Egyptian-born, Saudi-born. So it's not a matter of Westerners who happen to be Arab who are Muslims that we're
No, there were issues that Kevin brought up concerning like particular individuals, basically a generalization of all of Islam or the Muslim experience or Muslim people and their experience in their various countries as being like her experience specifically. I think that was one thing that he brought up. But again, I think it's kind of diverging a bit from the topic.
Let's bring it back around. So let's say with the last thing to kind of wrap it up, maybe would you, given everything that we've talked about, being that like I said at the beginning, I refuse to let other people, be they anti-feminists or feminists who hold values other than myself, define for me what feminism is. So I identify as a feminist, I identify as an atheist, despite other people who may hold the label that I disagree with. Would you then, in order to try and salvage the identity of somebody who fights for legitimate men's issues, identify as a men's rights activist yourself?
Wait, I'm sorry. What was the crux of the question again?
Would you call yourself an MRA in order to set a better example of what an MRA should be?
Personally, no, but that's just because, again, it's a question of effectiveness of rebranding the term, and I would personally at this point suggest that anybody who wants to fight for men's rights should try and come up with a different term to differentiate themselves precisely from what the MRA seems to, by and large, be, which is an anti-feminist reactionary group that doesn't actually work for men's rights. And so, because that is the character of the overall group, I wouldn't call myself that for the simple fact that that's not what they are. If that was what they were in any way in practice, then I might. And if there was a group that was worth the name, that had a different name that wasn't already toxified so much, more or less, I guess I think it's a fool's errand to try and rebrand the term at this point. But if people want to try, then I would be, at some point, I'm sure there is a degree of them having separated themselves that I could be in favor of helping to rebrand the term by adopting it myself, by specifically associating myself with that portion of the group. But I don't see that happening.
I would have to disagree ever so slightly, and that, see, I would consider myself an advocate of men's rights. Like, everybody, in fact, should have rights.
Lowercase, right?
Yes, very much. Men should have rights. Those inalienable human rights for life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, the basic things that we all enjoy. Like, everybody should have an advocate in their corner for the basic rights that we all should enjoy.
In the instant that men are denied any rights for being men, you would be on their side?
Yes, in the instant. No one should be discriminated against purely for who they are as a person. You can be, make a choice that's bad. You can be a murderer. You can be something awful, and you should be then held to a standard based on you committed a horrible crime for no reason. There are actions that can pull you away from what should be considered a baseline respect. Okay, so you're an unrepentant mass murderer. Fine, we need to give you a different treatment. But discriminating against you for something that you don't choose, for something that you don't actively have a choice or vote in. I'm a man. I'm born a man. You're born a woman. You are given these certain roles, these standards. You shouldn't be discriminated against or held to a different standard that is less because of something that is inborn to you. You should not be discriminated against because of something that you carry or have simply because of an accident of birth. And so I would be in the corner of anyone who advocated for giving the basic rights and respect to a group that was denied it. But this comes to a point of labels, as you said.
See, that's what I was going to say. It seems that we agree on the substance, but the only reason for our dissident choices is because I focus on the perception. Because that's the thing, is that these types of people win on the perception war. That's where they keep trying to win. That's the false equivalence they make between themselves and feminists, is to try and win on that perception war. So
exactly. So while I would call myself an advocate of anyone's rights who needs an advocate, I would not label myself as a capital men's rights movement person because of the fact that this carries certain sociological expectations, certain harmful automatic assumptions, where in a lot of circles, if I say I identify as a men's rights movement person, there are going to be a lot of automatic and harmful assumptions to conversation that are going to be made to start, where they might very well assume that I think that, you know, all feminists are evil. They might assume that I think X, Y, or Z about social movements that have nothing to do with my opinions. And so effectively, you have to choose labels that best convey what you feel. They're shortcuts. Labels are shorthand for expressing what you feel to another person quickly. So if I call myself a feminist, this conveys certain key ideas about what I think so a person can easily understand it.
And they're only really negative ideas in those circles that are already anti-feminist. That's the thing. Because they would try and falsely equate it again where, oh, well, so you'll call yourself a feminist despite the radicals. And it's like, yes, because, again, they don't comprise the character of the movement, as opposed to with the MRM where anti-feminists do.
And see, it's not so much, I think, if we want to kind of head towards wrapping up,
Sure.
I would think more our side, if I were to speak for you a little too,
Okay.
that it's not so much that, you know, you can't advocate for men's rights. You can't be a group of men working together to advocate for the furtherment of your people. It's that you need to choose effective labels to carry this conversation. If you walk into a conversation about, you know, feminism, and you start obfuscating the point by saying, well, I'm not really a feminist, I carry this and this, but I don't do this and I don't do this. It is important to a point, but at the same time, you're not having the conversation at hand by entering a feminist conversation. The label carries certain expectations. A feminist conversation for feminist goals is going to go in a feminist direction. And everybody sort of gets on the same page by knowing what the label means in a social context. The problem becomes you choose the label men's rights activist. It comes with so many toxic and negative connotations to start that I don't think you can have an effective conversation about men's rights and where they're jeopardized by having that label to start. It comes wrapped up with too many other things, and if people were to reclaim it, awesome, great, that would be wonderful. But I don't see how that starts so long as the anti-feminists have holed up in this movement as the majority of it.
I think that's a great ending point. Thank you both very much for joining us, and hopefully next time we all get together, we can be challenged on our ideas by people who hold different views than us.
Yes.
Maybe we can cooperate on a debate with some anti-feminists or something.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
All right.
All
Thank you
right.
very much.
Take care, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you for watching.
Yes, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.